Hey, Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Shannon, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm happy to have you. Would you mind just introducing yourself real quick to those listening?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Lindsey Pollak. I am a career and workplace expert, and I have a special area of research and writing in generational differences.
Okay, so I've been meaning to ask you this, and I was like, I'm waiting until the show. Why and when did you become so passionate about learning this and teaching it to others in terms of generational differences?
This is my favorite question because nobody sort of grows up saying, I want to be a generational diversity expert when I grow up. It wasn't a thing. I didn't start this way. I always say my origin story is that I was an RA in college, resident advisor, and I absolutely loved being a senior and mentoring and guiding the young people, but also having to deal with the administration. So I've always been sort of good at that kind of what I call a translator role. Like I can sort of explain the older people to the younger and vice versa. And I always really liked that. And of course, it took years to figure out that that could be a career. But I actually started a business writing and speaking to college students only. So my first book in 2007 was called Getting from College to Career. And for 10 years, I had a business teaching college students how to get jobs in the new digital economy, which was in the late 1990s, early 2000s. And in about 2008, something kind of magical happened, which is the word millennial just exploded into pop culture. I think it was around the election of that year that we realized millennials were going to be this voting bloc. And I got a call out of the blue from your industry, from PricewaterhouseCoopers at the time. And they called me and said, we hear that you speak to college students and advise college students. And I said, well, yeah. And they said, we hear that you kind of understand this new millennial generation. And I said, I guess so. I mean, that's kind of what I do. And they said, well, can you help us do that? And it was the first time I realized, wow, it's not just teaching young people, but a lot of people don't really understand them. So I am kind of credited often as being the first, quote, millennial career expert, although I myself am a Gen X. I was born in the 70s. And what happened over time is people said, great, thanks for teaching us about the millennials. What about the Gen Xers? What about the baby boomers? And now what about the Gen Zs? And I just became totally fascinated. So I'm so grateful to PwC. I'm grateful that people are interested in this topic. And my favorite thing about it, everyone's an expert because we're all members of families. I just take that and apply a lot of what we know about age difference into the workplace.
Yeah, and I think that there's always going to be resistance and always going to be a need to better communicate with one another. It's just something that's always going to be true because when there's, we may nail the communication between two generations and then we basically gang up on the third one. And then
just like in families.
Yeah, just like perpetual, almost hazing of the freshmen. It's just what happens. Like we get annoyed by the friggin' freshmen coming in. So I love that you say, like I was speaking to the young people. And it's funny because it depends on how you identify in your generation and, where you lie. So before we get into a lot of this, like interrelations between the generations, let's talk about who is in what generation and kind of settle this because there's a lot of people who are kind of hovering in between or not really sure. So what are the official years for each one?
Okay, when I give keynote speeches, this is the longest slide in my presentation. So I'll talk you through it really briefly. Take this all with a grain of salt. If you don't feel that these numbers apply to you, that's cool. But these are the official definitions by the Pew Research Center. If you were born before 1945, you're what's called a traditionalist. They're, 79, 80 to late 90s today. Warren Buffett, Rupert Murdoch are members of that generation. Still, some are working today. If you're a baby boomer, you were born between 1946 and 1964. That's the only generation to actually be designated by the US Census Bureau. So that's like an official designation, but that's a huge cohort. The boomers are the largest ever born into this country, 76 million. They're 60 to late 70s today. I myself am a Gen X. We are the smallest generation, born between 1965 and 1980. We're in our mid 40s to late 50s. Millennials, which I believe you identify with, Shannon, were born about 1981 to 1996, so late 20s to mid 40s. Generation Z are the newest entrants into the workplace and college. They were born between 1997 and 2012, so they're kind of 12, 13 years old to mid 20s. And now we had X, we had Y, we have Z. Now they ran out of letters and they are calling the next generation Gen Alpha. So kids who are younger than, maybe middle school today are being called Gen Alpha. But there are a couple of groups I want to mention. You might hear that and say, people tell me I'm a millennial, but that doesn't really speak to me. A lot of people now are calling themselves part of what we call micro generations. And I think this is really interesting because what it says to me is people don't like to be part of groups with 60 million people, 80 million people. When technology is moving so fast, it just doesn't really make sense anymore. So you might hear the phrase Generation Jones, which are people who are younger boomers or older Xers who say, you're telling me I'm a baby boomer, but like, I didn't have a good economy. I didn't experience the summer of love. I was like in diapers during Woodstock. Like, this doesn't resonate. My older brother is a boomer. So Generation Jones comes from keeping up with the Joneses. And a lot of people feel they kind of missed out on the boomer. What we're hearing a lot now is the term Xennial, starting with an X. Xennials are younger Xers or older millennials who kind of say, like, I don't really feel part of either of those groups. And the key signifier of being a Xennial is that your first video game was Oregon Trail. So if that resonates, that you kind of played Oregon Trail as a kid, you're probably a Xennial. And now we have Zillennial, which is kind of a younger millennial, older Z. And those are people who feel kind of caught between the two. In Asia, they often talk about generations by decade, children of the 70s, children of the 80s. I wonder if we're kind of headed in that direction because a lot of people feel that you can't have a lot in common anymore with someone born 18 years before or after you. And I think that makes a lot of sense. So there's a lot of stratification happening in the generations.
Yeah, I also feel like those like windows have to shrink because of how technology is moving and the experience that we're having in our life. Like, there will be an AI generation, a Google generation, I feel like it's more akin to like the iPhone generation or whatever it was. Like, I'm technically a millennial, but I had to type the letters on the Nokia phone one at a freaking time. It's different. Not every millennial had that experience. There are some that grew up with screens since they were young, and some of us who had to research our projects using encyclopedias and note cards at the library. So
that's exactly right.
A very different experience. And I always also feel like we wear like a badge of honor the struggle. Right. That like we're tagged by almost an advancement and a struggle. I feel like combined, it kind of informs what you feel like you are. Because it's like, I feel like a millennial, but I had to do this and therefore I must be a Gen X too. Where do you think that comes from? Do you think we identify using those types of traits like struggling or what our experience was?
I think it's so much like a family. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm the oldest child, which the youngest would say, you're so lucky. And I'm like, you're so lucky, so it's sort of like the burden and, the curse, but also the advantage. So I think it really comes from that experience that everything is kind of two sides of a coin and it's good and it's bad. But, we often hear about the bad in the media, unfortunately.
Yeah, very true. I think everybody kind of poo-poos on the next generation. I'm interested to get your thoughts on why you think we're so critical of one another. Especially given we've all kind of been through, like, I'm a millennial, let's say, and I'm like Xennial, millennial, whatever. I'm a millennial. I remember getting poo-pooed on by the boomers nonstop when I first started working because everybody thought we were entitled. Everybody thought we were the avocado toast people and that we had expensive taste. What was it? We had like a champagne taste on a beer budget, whatever it was. All of the stereotypes that formed around millennials. And I remember being on the other side of that. And now my whole generation is poo-pooing on Gen Z just the same. And I'm like, you don't remember what it was like for you? Why do you think we do that?
I have such a good story for you. I was at a bank and I do a lot of workshops for early career professionals. And I was with a group of first day employees. It was their first day on the job. I was doing a soft skills communication training. And I was kind of wandering around before the session and I heard them chit-chatting saying, oh, I heard they're terrible. Yeah, I heard we were so much better. Yeah, I know. Everyone's saying they're really lazy. And I walked over and I said, hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm just so curious. You just started today, right? And they said, yeah. And I said, who are you talking about? And they said, oh, the interns. The minute you have a couple hours of power and experience, you're immediately turning around to the next group. I think we do it for two reasons. I think one is fear, right? Oh, maybe they're going to get something better than we are. Maybe they're going to be better than we are. So let's kind of put them down. And I think the other is we misremember what things were like when we started out. Oh, back in my day, we put in so much more work. I had such a big work ethic. I, walked uphill both way in the snow to school. I think it's that too. But, I know I have a little bit of envy for the younger generations that have the technology that I didn't have, that maybe have opportunities. But I also feel lucky that I don't have some of the burdens that the younger generations have. So I think you really nailed it, that there's always a positive and a negative, and we have to choose how we want to see the generational differences.
Yeah. And I feel like it's almost like a reaction to them not listening to you. And trying to prove why you should be listened to or why you have credibility in a way. It feels almost like in my day, we had to walk both ways uphill, like you said, or in my day, we had to research things by paper. It's almost like a be grateful for what you have message that is just kind of, I say, wrongly packaged.
It's very hard, particularly for people listening who are managing other people. It's very hard to manage in a way that is nicer or more gracious or more generous than you were managed, right? Same with parenting. And sometimes people react the exact opposite. But for example, I'm a Gen Xer. So a lot of what I talk about is not really the year you were born. It's the year you entered the workplace. So I was born in the 70s. We could talk about fashion and TV show and all that kind of stuff, and it's fun. But to me, I entered work. I graduated college in 1996. So I came out of school and started working in the dot-com boom, in the early days of email. Silicon Valley was so popular. Entrepreneurship was so glamorized, having good writing skills because email was so prominent. I think, am affected by having started in that culture. And one of the things I talk about with a Gen X and a boomer, when I started, I genuinely didn't have any technical skills that my boss didn't have. Right? The whole thing about ask the 5-year-old to program the VCR, or,
right.
Look at me as a Gen Xer talking about a VCR, but that's very new historically. My boss knew how to do everything. So I didn't really have anything to bring to the table other than enthusiasm, right? Or maybe a work ethic. When that changed really with the millennial generation, suddenly it was wait a minute, you have some power here. You actually know how to do something I don't know how to do. And that was very uncomfortable for traditionalists and baby boomers and Xers who had always thought the older you are, the more experienced you are, the better you are. And now that's not necessarily the case. And I think with AI, we're going to see that even more, that suddenly skills are becoming outdated so quickly. There's a lot of fear there. And I think that's why the generations have to see the value. Everyone needs to see the value in every generation, because my communication skills might be better, but your technical skills might be better. And so we're both necessary to the workplace success.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head when it's fear and slight insecurity, because it makes us feel like, well, how is it possible that this person with such little experience can do X, Y, Z and I can't? It makes you feel lesser than, or it makes you feel insecure. It's also, I would say, coupled with we'll say the older generations. I don't know what the proper term is, but yes, the older generations, they also, I'm going to say they value the time put into something. The experience, right? How long have you been doing something? You've been doing something for 20 years, you have credibility, versus 20 minutes, even if the 20-minute person can do it better. It's more about the input versus output. Do you notice that pattern as well?
I do. And it's something I'm trying to change about myself, because you really have to question our assumptions and expectations about everything. It was certainly drilled into me. The harder you work, the longer you work, the better you are. That's not necessarily the case, right? So if someone can do it really, really well and really, really fast, I need to be able to accept that. And so I think we all have to kind of look internally. And one of the words I want to introduce is the word perennial, starting with a P. Gina Pell, who's a technology entrepreneur, kind of coined that term. I just saw someone wrote a book about it. A perennial means you are the age you are. There's nothing you can do about that. But you always commit to two things. You know your history, and you keep up with the times. So my job as a Gen X is to share with you the history of this is how we used to do it. This is why I think it's really important to get to know our clients and have a good relationship. This is why I spend the time on it, etc. And it's my job to know what TikTok is and to say, if you could do that faster, awesome, show me how. And a younger person needs to take the time. So just a quick example, I worked with an architect and he said, I learned how to design with a pencil. And now, of course, everyone uses CAD design software. Of course, I use CAD, he said, but I teach my students how to use a pencil because that has value too for different things. So it's not either or, it's both. And I think that's how you have to approach it. Neither way is right or wrong, good or bad, better or worse. They're just different and they both have value.
I think that's so true. And I want to get into some of the tips on how to work well with each other. I know this is going to be so valuable for listeners, especially when they're managing teams and hiring. But I want you to indulge me in one question that's very selfish, because I'm just dying to hear about, I have this conversation all the time, and I have this weird theory about music. as well with the generations. We are so proud of whatever. And I honestly feel like it's whatever music we were listening to at 14 is frozen. It's frozen. Whatever we listen to at 14 is our music. And it's like anything after that, it's almost like I turned off the quote unquote radio, whether that's actually still a thing or not. I turned off the radio at that point and I was like, we have now downloaded into my brain all the music I will ever need. And I will listen to it 20 years later. And I feel like it was dad rock. And then it was like the car music growing up. It was always what people listen to in their teens. Do you have any like insights into a little bit why we kind of like put ourselves in that time capsule musically?
You are spot on. Psychologists say that there is an age when you sort of realize there's a bigger world, right? When you're a little kid, you just see your family and the people you know. But then as you get into age 10 to 13, so I think 14 is right on that cusp, you start to realize, oh, other people's families might be different than mine. Other people like things that I didn't know about, right? And I have a 12-year-old daughter and I'm seeing her go through this, right? You start to develop, well, I don't want my bed in that side of the room. I want to put it here and I don't want to dress like that. And I want to listen to this music. And you start to be aware of those kinds of things. So it hits at puberty, really, where you start to become an individual and you start to identify more with your peers and less with your family of origin. So 13, 14, I think is spot on. I think you were talking about going into high school probably is kind of that moment. Absolutely. Yeah. But again, doesn't mean that I can't like Taylor Swift, right? I kind of have to, living in a house with a 12-year-old girl. Yeah. But that kind of music, I think, is a perfect example of how you are from the time you are, but it doesn't mean you can't appreciate and enjoy and learn about music from other eras. But I think music is always a definer of the generations. I love that example, but you're spot on with the age.
We had, there was a post recently that was Gen Z saying, millennials in the club, I can tell who you are because your hands are up. And then the comments, Lindsey, if you haven't seen this, the comments that ensued had me in stitches. It was like, we were literally instructed to do that if we don't care. We were
Put literally your hands in the air. Yeah.
Like we were literally instructed. And then someone said, well, how are you going to point from the window to the wall? Like, it was so funny because it started referencing every song where they said to do that. And the entire generation just bands together. And it was just really great. So I just love those moments.
I just can't help but laugh. So I started my business in 2002. I was a Gen X and everyone was freaking out about the millennials and avocado toast, like you said, and Facebook and all these things. And I mean, for 10 years, it was millennials. And now millennials are old and Gen Zs are making fun of the millennials. It's just, it happens over and over again. And I can't even believe it. And I know it's going to happen with the Gen Zs talking about the Gen Alphas. We do this over and over again. There's a quote I like to share. I see no hope for the future of our people if we're dependent on the frivolous youth of today. And it's from the 8th century BC. That's how long we have been worried about the next generation, and we just keep doing it.
That's so funny. It's just human nature at this point, and we have to accept it. But there's ways we can, I mean, to some extent, we have an understanding and understand this is part of the process. It's going to happen. But there are ways to go against the tide of that, right? And to actually be conscious of when those biases show and when it can affect how we work with others and work with customers and other businesses, right? Before we lead into the next episode, where we're really going to dive into that, just give us a little bit of a taste of, what are some of the ways that can manifest in the sense of where those generational struggles will show up, say in your business, in your team, in your career, that would make you want to pause, stop, and maybe re-listen to the next episode and go, wait a minute, I think my bias is showing, or wait a minute, I think I need to be implementing some of these things Lindsey says. What are some of the ways that people will see that happen?
I think there's 3 key areas that we can talk about in the workplace context. The first is in career development. I think people should be on a career ladder, let's say, and get the next job. And you might not want that. I think people when they're young should work really hard and gun it and put in a lot of hours. You might not want that. I think people should retire at 65. I want to work till I'm 90. So career development is a place where we see a lot of clash of expectations and belief of what's right. Second area, of course, is communication. Communication to me is, why did you call me? Why didn't you text me? What, you left me a voicemail? I don't do voicemail. stop in to see Shannon. Well, I don't want to. I don't feel comfortable doing that, right? So we kind of have that in communication, especially when it comes to marketing to different customers, as you said. And I think the third area is culture. What does it mean to be loyal? What does it mean to be part of an organization? What does it mean to mentor somebody? How do you have relationships when you're the boss and you're younger than everybody who works for you? So I think career development, communication, and culture. And I think the overarching theme is expectations and assumptions. Don't look at somebody and decide what they want or who they are or what they can contribute based on their age, just like any element of diversity. And that's where I always start the conversation.
I totally agree. I love it. So we're going to continue this conversation into tomorrow's episode. Guys, Lindsey has an amazing guide on helping manage folks in the workplace cross generations. We're going to include a link in the show notes for that as well. And we're going to hear more about it on the next episode, along with all of your tips on how to manage better in your business and in your career across generations. All right, guys, welcome back. I'm here with Lindsey Pollak. Now, I gave you a little bit of an intro in the transition. So Lindsey, let's dive right in and talk about a continuation of yesterday's episode into the workplace and managing across generations. I know this is your cup of tea, your bread and butter, everything that you talk about. I want to hear from you on, we mentioned some of the problems that might be manifesting when you know you need a little bit of help in this area. Now let's talk about tips on how to overcome. You mentioned 3 key areas. Let's start with career development and how we can actually overcome those generational struggles.
So the theme that I would put over everything and career development in particular, I wrote a book in 2019 called The Remix. And I picked that title really deliberately because I think of a remix song, and you mentioned music in the last episode being so powerful to people. Remixes are really popular. And a remix is when you take a classic, wonderful, successful song and you don't say, boy, that song should retire. It's getting old. You say, that's an amazing song, but we could do other stuff with it, right? We could modernize it. And when I picked that title, I interviewed some music producers and DJs. And one DJ told me that when she plays a wedding, which is almost always a multi-generational event, when the dance floor is empty, she said, I always play a remix. And the reason is the older people know the classic song and they feel included and come and dance. And the younger people know the remix modern version. They feel included and come and dance. It's not about, do we communicate the way millennials want or the way baby boomers want? Do we build career development paths the way we used to do it or the way we should do it now? We don't build culture for one group. It has to be everyone together. So anytime you're thinking, should we do it this way, either or, I want you to think and. And so when it comes to career development, it used to be my way or the highway, up or out, right? You don't want to work here, leave. You don't want the next job, go away. And one of the big trends, I think, to support generational diversity, even in a tiny business, is internal mobility. I don't necessarily want to get promoted from junior accountant to senior accountant. I think I might want to try marketing. Okay, let's figure out a path for you to do that. I'm in my 20s, but I want to travel the world and work later in my career. That's really popular right now. Okay, let's find a way for you to do that. I'm 70, but I want to work for the next 10 years and I'm super energetic and I'm a great manager. Fantastic. We can make that work here. So I think the idea is not to assume based on your age or your life stage or your circumstances or what I did in my career that you want the same thing I did. So the action as a leader is to have what are called stay conversations with Shannon. We value you so much. What do you want from your career? How can I support you? Not, Shannon, I'm going to promote you to the next job. I have made a decision about your career. I'm going to ask you what you want from your career.
And here's the funny thing about that question too, Lindsey. If even like let's say a boomer Gen X is asking me that question, I go, they want to hear what they want to hear from me. And everybody always will assume if someone says, what do you want out of your career here? You're going to answer. It's very like psychologically spinning because I'm going to, well, at least earlier in my career, I would have answered like, I want to stay here. I want to make partner. And I was like, I don't know what the hell I want. That was part of my identity. It was like, none of us knew what the hell we wanted to do. So I think if that's an available choice to say, and it's okay if you have no effing idea. Would you like to try a few things to see what sticks? Would you like some other opportunities to learn what the options are? I think we have to expand beyond the one-way communication too of that and say, like, do you feel like you have a grasp of that? Right? Because there's a lot of different aspects of it. And just to relate to that, the latter was the valued corporate acceleration when I was coming up in 2008. 2008, I graduated. So we graduated and we had the financial crisis immediately. It was my second week at the firm. And then we had 3 rounds of layoffs my first year at the firm. That informs a lot about your work ethic. To your point on the earlier episode, yes. But I also realized as I progressed through my career that my career turned into a jungle gym, not a ladder. That I always say your actual progression is a jungle gym, not a ladder. So you are spot on that. But I think that there's a lot of struggle because we're not sure how to communicate with each other or answer those questions. So even if the manager is in the position and being coached on how to communicate down, the folks at the bottom, if you will, or the younger staff also need to understand, how to communicate upward, right?
Yeah, I love that jungle gym. I think that really resonates with a lot of people. It can be hard to implement this in a family business or a small business. We don't have a marketing department. We have 3 people who work here. I think when it comes to career development, sometimes it's just about learning. So you might not have known what you wanted from your career, but I bet I kind of want to learn a little bit more about this. I would like to take a class on this, right? So something like LinkedIn Learning or Udemy or Coursera or YouTube, right? Where, Shannon, my employee, where can I give you a little more education? Where do you want to develop? Where do you want to grow? Where do you want mentoring? That's a good interim step when you're not sure exactly what you want and when you're in a size business where you don't have a lot of different places for people to move.
For sure. And it just made me realize one thing that we've implemented in our business is I've just given a broad stipend to folks on personal development and said, you have X amount of money. Come to me with how you want to develop yourself. So is it in leadership? Is it in marketing? Is it in sales? Like, do you want to go deeper on a topic? But I let them shop for it as opposed to me prescribing it. And I say, come to me with what you want to learn and I will fully support it if we can argue why it's going to bring us value.
I love that. And when you look at charts of what the generations want, sometimes they're all over the map. But the one chart I've seen where every generation wants the same thing is learning and growth. Nobody's ever like, I don't really want to get better at anything. Everybody wants that, whether you're first day on the job or last day before retirement. So that's always great. I love that you do that.
Yes. Learning, not a pizza party. How many jokes do we have about like a pizza party? Like, give me a raise, not a pizza party.
I was saying like half of your employees don't eat gluten. So, like it's not going to resonate with people. Pizza party,
I know, right? Is it gluten free? That's so funny. So what other tips do you have, especially for, let's just say, I'll use like sort of my scenario as an example. It's quite common. We came up through corporate. We have a certain amount of value, skills, and experience, and a little bit of trauma, if I'm being honest. We come out and we want to start our own businesses. Say we're in the Gen X, even we didn't say Gen Y. What's Gen Y? Millennials or Gen Y?
Gen Y
right?
is another word for millennial. It used to be popular and millennial took over.
Yeah, Gen X millennials, we're like, okay, we finally kind of had it and we jump ship and we go, I'm going to start my own business. And now we're hiring Gen Z, Gen Alpha almost. And what are some of your tips for both sides of that in how, especially in a small business context, when I feel like there's a conflict, and this is actually happening in my business, where the younger staff, their parents are instilling certain beliefs on what success looks like. And then they're working with small business owners, or they're working, like, I feel like they're all being encouraged to go the corporate route or the college route, but there's all these alternatives popping up. Basically, I have a multidimensional question on like where we're heading from a younger staff perspective, working for some of these folks who are starting their own businesses, and how that is shifting kind of our definition of what success looks like.
So my first book, Getting from College to Career, came out in 2007. I just finished updating it in a 3rd edition that's going to come out later in 2024. And I could not believe in 2007, so very close to when you graduated in 08, I was basically only talking about corporates and corporate recruiting. Even though I worked in corporate for 18 months and then started my own business, even I, who had that background, leaned toward get a job with a big company. Yep. And this new edition, it's about side gigs and it's about working for entrepreneurs and working in startups and doing your own thing. And there's so many opportunities out there. I don't think it's a bad thing to start at a big company and get that training. In fact, I sometimes wish I had a little bit more of that process knowledge and so on. But I think that, one thing I would talk about, and I think it's so poignant that you graduated in 08. I think you're a generation in and of yourself, just like I think the kids who graduate in 2020 are kind of a micro generation. I remember in the 80s, I grew up on the East Coast. That's when the first big corporate layoffs happened in the United States. Companies like IBM and Ford had always said, we don't lay off employees. We don't do that in America. And in the 1980s, that started to happen with offshoring and outsourcing. And I remember kids my age saying, I will never, ever give my life to a corporation. And Gen X has proved themselves to be the most entrepreneurial generation that's ever been. I think when you see the layoffs that happen, young people say to me in focus groups all the time, you ask me why we're not loyal? They're not loyal. Like, people get hired and they get laid off 3 months later. People get hired as consultants and they never get benefits. I think that people's eyes are really open to the fact that it used to seem that corporate was, quote, safer than other environments. And it really isn't. So I think Gen Zs and in the future, Gen Alphas are much savvier about understanding that there's so many other choices, and a corporation with benefits is not necessarily that. There's some massive statistic about Gen Zs, like 80% have a side gig or something because they don't trust that their job is going to give them everything they want. So I think it's a good thing, because I have a lot of friends now in their 40s and 50s getting laid off after 20 years, and they're blindsided because they didn't think that was possible. So a very long, complicated answer, but the reality is there are a lot of choices, and corporate isn't necessarily better.
I agree. I always feel, I had this sense of, if I'm being honest, this sense of like, when I took on interns, I was like, I don't want to take them away from a quote unquote real internship. I was thinking, why would someone work for me as an intern when, like, so in accounting, right, culturally, when I was going to school for accounting, was you do your 4 years, you intern at a big four, you graduate, and you come back and work there. That's just what you did. If you didn't do that, you were weird. You were like off the beaten path. It was kind of carved out for you of this is what you're quote unquote supposed to do. But then for me offering an internship, I actually felt the sense of, because of where I came from, I felt the sense of like, I want to offer an internship, but like, I don't want to waste their time working for little old me when like they should, like, I don't want to take them off the beaten path. I don't want to take them off of their track or have them go sideways and miss out on, a big four internship. And I really had to do some work around, like, it's not worse. In fact, the person I did hire is still with us. And he's like, I plan to stay here as long as possible because I did work for another firm and I just like this better. And it actually is reframing into an opportunity rather than like a missed opportunity.
I love this because I resonate with your intern. I walked into my first job at Working Woman magazine and I was like, I don't get that someone's telling me when to be here. Like, I just have an entrepreneurial spirit. It's just who I am. And when I was starting in the late 90s, there were no other paths. I'm sure there were, but I didn't know about that. So I think it's sort of like, remember when we thought every family was a mother, a father, 2 kids, and a dog, and a picket fence? And of course, that was never every family, but anyone who wasn't in that felt that they were weird and different. And now we know
every sitcom.
Of course. And now we realize there are a million other ways to make a family. So what I think is everyone never fit that big four model. It just felt like you had to. And a lot of people were probably very unhappy and unsatisfied and unsuccessful in that system. Now that we have more choices, it's harder to navigate. I'll give you that. It is harder to find Shannon Weinstein's company when you're used to the big four, but you're serving more people because nobody ever fit into the same model. So I have a mantra on career development, which is never assume, always ask. They might hate the big four and desperately want a small environment. Don't assume that you're not what they want. Always ask.
And I think a lot of that comes from a conflict here. And I have to share as well. I'm on the board of the accounting department at my alma mater. And the professors are the same professors I had. Okay. The average amount of time the professors have spent there is north of 2 decades. So they've been teaching for 20, 30. One of them has been there since the year I was born. And I'm now serving on the board and I'm now hiring their students. And it's such a weird time warp situation. But what I'm realizing is the difference in perception of what valued traits and skills are, what we're looking for, and what a successful career path looks like. And what scares me a little bit is that disconnect, because you have professors who are advising these students and parents who are advising these students who aren't always getting it exactly right when it comes to what the demands of the marketplace are. Do you see that?
I do. And I love they're so lucky to have you. I am a huge advocate of college career services, which often gets kind of shunted to the side. I do a lot of volunteering for the National Association of Colleges and Employers. college career centers, it is their job to be perennials. It is their job to understand the professors are going to tell you this, your parents are going to tell you this, but this is the real marketplace. So, I have a line in my book, do not pass go until you go to your career center. Most kids don't, and they are so valuable. And if you're a small business owner wanting to hire interns and young people, go to your local community colleges, go to your alma mater, list your jobs there, and they will send you the kind of students who are a good fit for your environment. They are gold, and they often don't get the credit they deserve.
Yeah, I think don't sleep on college interns. Don't sleep on hiring folks who are younger, even if you don't feel like you understand them. Again, use Lindsey's resources to help understand them. For those who are listening, they're probably in the position of founder, business owner, manager. So I'd like to lean more into that side, but I would love some tips, Lindsey, on how to, in a real life scenario, how we can bridge these generational gaps from a communication standpoint, some actual tactics that you've seen work and that have improved relationships between these generations, and how our listeners can leverage those in their own business.
So this would move us into the communication category. Communication is where most people feel this, right? I feel like we're speaking different languages. And I think that as a business owner, as a person, you have to make a choice and say, I am not going to see these generational differences as a problem, as a challenge, as a pain in the neck, all these kids today. I'm going to choose to be positive about it. People always ask me, what are the best multi-generational environments you see? And I always say political campaigns, because we know that if you want to get anyone elected in this world, you need voters of every age. And so there's this inherent belief that, oh my gosh, we need 18-year-olds because they're going to talk to the 18-year-olds, and we need 90-year-olds because they're going to talk to the 90-year-olds, and everyone's important. And that's how I think we should all approach this, because most of our customers are all generations. So first is take a positive approach. The second thing on communication, and this is so critical, I think we beat around the bush all the time. We don't want to be mean, and we just assume that when I say something, you understand. So I'm going to steal a line from Brene Brown. Clear is kind. If we're going to work together and you're an intern and I'm a baby boomer business owner, and I say, hey, Shannon, come in early tomorrow. Early to you might mean 2 minutes. Early to me might mean an hour. If I say, hey, Shannon, could you, make your writing a little more professional? You might not know what I mean. So unwritten rules, undefined terminology, it just doesn't cut it. I also think we assume that everyone communicates the way we do. So number one, define all of your terms like better and early and professional and appropriate. And second is, whenever you work with anybody, have what's called the style conversation, which is we're going to be working together. I want to let you know, this is how I like to communicate. I go to yoga on Wednesdays at 9 a.m. Terrible time to reach me. I just spoke to a woman who works in higher education. She's an athletic director. She said when she started the job, she got her whole team together and said, we're going to set some ground rules for how we communicate. Email me first. If I don't respond to your email, if you really need to get in touch with me, I want you to text me. If something is urgent, life or death, that is the only time I want you to call my cell phone. And I promise you, I will always answer. So we now know that if my phone rings, you have gone through all those different steps and now you're going to call me. We've all agreed to that in advance rather than wondering, should I call? Should I email? Should I text? I don't know. She doesn't seem to respond to me. Communicate about how you want to communicate.
Yes. But also, I will say this. I communicate that with my team. Like, this is how I prefer to communicate. But also, I say, when you have a question, what instinctively do you want to do? Like, what is the most comfortable way for you to ask a question? Because I'm actually more worried about them not asking a question. Because if I say, please call me with your questions, but we're talking about people who have like phone anxiety, I also want to reduce the barrier for them to do the action. So I say, what is in your nature that we can then find a common ground in between? And for us, the answer to that was actually Slack, because I said, some of you write, some of you audio, some of you video. All of it can go in there. So like whatever way you want to communicate with me is totally fine. And that tends to work with a lot of people. But you have to find, like you said, you have to find that remix of how can you make everybody somewhat happy or make everybody more productive and more effective, I should say, without making someone feel like they're fully sacrificing their style to accommodate the other, right?
So I think you just self-identified as a Zennial, and I'll tell you why. I think that you're bilingual. I think you have your preferences, but you're flexible and you're adaptable. Yep. Some people just aren't. And I want to be sort of compassionate to people who say, like, I will tell you, I hate Slack. I will not use it in my business, and it's my business, so I can set that rule. If I worked in a big company or I had 20 Gen Zs working for me, I might not have that option. But I need to hire someone and say, and be honest and clear from the start, I'm sure you don't want it, but I really like email. And so just so you know, that's part of the job. I think we're afraid to be honest about what things are going to be like. So if you're not flexible, be clear that you're not flexible and don't hire people who are not willing to communicate the way you want. I think we think everybody can be adaptable, and they might not. So I know as a small business owner, sometimes you have to make really tough choices and say, this is the way I do things. I'm adaptable to a point, but not adaptable enough to use Slack. And that's okay. If I have a bigger team, I might not have a choice.
Exactly. But I think it's knowing what the deal breakers are and being able to express them if they are deal breaker level for you. You know, for me, for me, I'm an audio person. I need to do voice notes because that's how I can express myself faster. My thumbs can't move that fast on my phone, and it drives me nuts when I have to type because I spell everything wrong. And it's like, when you can express, these are my preferences and this is how I operate. But you have to be careful to say, I'm not forcing you to operate that way. But if you also understand how I operate, now you understand how things will move forward faster than if you go the other way. It doesn't always have to be deal breaker. I do get, like, set expectations of what you want for sure. But I think there are some ways where we're used to, at least me, I'm used to, if a partner says, this is how I communicate, it's like, well, that's now how I communicate now. Or when you have 8 different partners you serve, like I did, and they all had distinctly different preferences. Oh, that is such a burnout. When I have to handwrite these for Joe, and then I have to email the slides to this person, and then and it makes you lose a lot of what the objective really is of the job and disconnect you. So I think there's a degree of awareness you have to have on that.
Yeah. And I really resonate with that about having to adapt to 8 different people. If anyone's listening who works in corporate, when I teach communication sessions to junior employees, I talk about that as a superpower. I call it being a communication chameleon, and not, I have to communicate differently, but okay, I am going to nail it with each of these people. Cause I'll tell you what, Shannon, you and I are entrepreneurs. I have to do that with my clients. I have clients who talk on the phone. I have clients who don't. I have clients who use WebEx, who won't use Zoom. And that's my job to know it. So I try to, again, take not Pollyanna, but the positive approach that if you can be good at communicating in different ways, you win. Because I never, ever, ever hear anyone say young people are dumb. Of all the criticisms, nobody says they're dumb. It's just they don't communicate the way I do. So if you can be a perennial in how you communicate, you win the future, because everybody's so different. We're going to be a multi-generational workplace forever. It's just going to change who the generations are. And I just wanted to reiterate your other point, which I think gets to culture, the third piece I wanted to talk about. As a leader, if you say, this is how we're going to communicate, the how is okay, but the why is so much more important.
Yes.
And if you say, we're going to use voice notes because that's how I think and that's how I communicate, and I want you to hear the tone of voice, they'll say, okay. But if you say, because I said so, or because I don't want to learn Slack, that's not a good enough why. And so that's the critical piece that bosses miss. Why?
Yeah. When you understand why it's being done that way and understand the alternative is a disadvantage, it makes more sense, and people are willing to adapt to it a little bit. And it's so hard because we have this push and pull of, do I have to adapt to other people, or can I ask for what I want? And I feel like there's just
it's not either
exactly,
or, it's both.
It's both. It's also knowing situationally what your deal breakers are and where you're willing to adapt and where you can have that flexibility. But I think that a lot of people are just a bit stuck in their ways. In a sense, they're clear on their preferences, but then they have to be really aware of, well, where can I offer a little flexibility because this person has a really clear why they prefer it that way, or a really clear why it's going to help them accomplish their objectives. But we're not going a layer deep enough. Like you said, we're not getting to the why culturally. We're just saying that this is how we do it here because that's how it is, or because that's how it's always been. And as a millennial, that is like the worst answer to any question, because a lot of us and generations below really value understanding the why before we're willing to adopt a new behavior.
Carla Harris, who is the author and speaker I know the most, I love her. I heard her say, when Baby Boomers and Xers started, when our boss said jump, we said, how high?
Right.
And now when your boss says jump, Gen Zs and millennials say, why? And that's a huge change. But here's the thing. If you ask why, two things happen. You get clear on whether you really have a good why. And other people say, okay, I'll give you a really funny example that probably resonates with your accounting world. I was working with investment bankers. They were talking about the kind of managing directors who want the staples in the corner of paper PowerPoint decks to all be aligned horizontally. Okay. I see you nodding and screaming angrily, right?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's menial labor. Do you know where I went to college? Are you kidding? That's so stupid. And finally somebody said, why? And he said, we have clients who are going to invest billions of dollars with us. If everyone gets a nice, neat packet and one looks messy, that person is going to feel less important. And I want everyone to know that we've put equal energy and attention into those decks and everybody's looks neat so that they don't feel lesser than. Oh, that makes total sense. Okay.
See, I know. And that's a key thing because I couldn't tell you how many of those I've done where they say, well, the staple isn't straight enough. And you want to go, are you effing kidding me? That you're going to make me keep doing this over and over again? And for what reason? And I think that's where we get frustrated. And to your point, if we understand the why of why this is a preference, I also think that you have to make the assumption that somebody asking you to do something isn't doing it just to spite you, isn't doing it just to make you work harder, isn't doing it to haze you or to frustrate you. You have to go, this is frustrating me, but they're not doing it for that sole purpose. There's a deeper why behind it probably that I just don't know. I think you have to also think about that as well, right? Even with clients, right? Like there's a reason they're asking me to do this instead of me responding emotionally, like thinking that they're just trying to inconvenience me. I think that's a communication opportunity.
But the burden is on us as leaders and business owners to say, do I have a good why? Or am I just making them do it because someone made me do it? I've seen a lot of examples, particularly with like promotions. Well, it took me 6 years to get promoted to VP, so it's going to take you 6 years. And you say, well, why?
Why?
And you might say, oh, maybe we don't have to do it that way anymore. So I think questioning your own why is really important. And I'll tell you another Big Four story. KPMG in 2015 did something called the Purpose Project, where they asked everybody, I don't know, were you at KPMG by any chance?
No, I was at EY. Luckily, okay. I've gotten off unscathed from all of your examples.
Okay, good. I love EY too. They're all great companies, but KPMG did something called the Purpose Project because they were always at the bottom of the, employee satisfaction of the other Big Four. They never ranked as high.
They're the one we always make fun of. Yeah.
Yeah. They had that reputation. They didn't like it, right? Which is understandable. And so they started this Purpose Project and they had people make posters and signs and put on social media. Like, what's the purpose of your job? Right. And it wasn't, I do spreadsheets. It was, I help small businesses, thrive. I, make sure jobs stay in our country. That there's a bottom line. And, there was even like an IT guy who said, like, I protect your data. That's my job. And people got really into it. And the year that they did this project, they were actually ranked number 1 in employee satisfaction in the Big Four. So I'm telling this story at another company recently. And this guy in the audience says, Lindsey, I was a partner at KPMG when we did that project. And I'm thinking, oh no, like everything I've read about it is not true. And he said, I got to tell you, I thought it was baloney. He used a different word. I thought this was bull. And then it worked. And he said, I thought, talking about purpose, why? I'm an accountant. And he said, it works. It works. It works. People want to feel like their job matters. And you want to feel that when you're 18 and you want to feel that when you're 80.
100%. And you want to build that culture around a workforce, a place people want to work. That's what I'm trying to say. A place people want to work at. It's not just to serve you, although there's a big why behind what you do as a founder or as a manager. You also have to be keeping in mind, like, do I want to build the type of place that people want to work at so I can attract top talent? And that's a key part of it. And it's not an obligation. It's an opportunity. It's completely not an obligation that you have to play nice in the sandbox. It's an opportunity. But as we wrap things up, Lindsey, I really want to focus on, your resources that you have for our listeners and just share with them how they can find out more about what you do, what you teach, and where they can find out more from you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. And Shannon, you've been really instrumental in helping to grow my business. So I want to thank you and recommend your services and products and resources. So my website is my name, lindseypollak.com. My book is The Remix, How to Lead and Succeed in the Multi-Generational Workplace. There's a free download there of tips on how to be a good leader. And if any of you are interested in short learning, I have 4 courses on LinkedIn Learning, including a 36-minute class called Managing a Multi-Generational Team that has a lot of really practical, tactical tips.
I love it. Guys, check that out. I'll be reading it. I'll be watching it. I'll be consuming all of Lindsey's content. I think this is such a fascinating topic, and one that when you really start being conscious of it, you start learning so much about how you can be a better leader. Lindsey, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great.